I have to start this talk by giving a shout out to my tiny hometown of 1,100 people, Napoleon, Michigan. It's where nearly every day after elementary school, I'd run in from the bus to tell my mom and my brother that I just had the best day ever. And they'd look at me, having heard it hundreds of times before, and say, "Was it better than yesterday?" And I'd be like, "Yes, it was better than yesterday." And I'd go on to tell them why. Well, for the last 16 years, I've been living those best days ever, working as a nurse anesthetist at C.S. Mott Children's Hospital in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and at Henry Ford Hospital in Detroit. This is a picture of my mom on the left when she was 6 years old. Her name is Suzanne. She grew up in a home on welfare with an alcoholic father who was angry and abusive to my grandmother. My mom and her 3 siblings witnessed things that children should never have to see. And that Christmas, when she turned 6 years old, she received the most expensive and the most prominent gift of her entire childhood, that doll that you see on the left. She named that doll Elizabeth. And as she would go on move to move, being on welfare 18 times before graduating high school, Elizabeth would be her source of comfort and her protection. And as a little girl, my mom promised God that if he ever gave her a real-life daughter, she would name her Elizabeth, and she would give her back to God to do his work. This is a picture of my mom and dad on the left. As I said, my mom's name is Suzanne. She was a licensed practical nurse that worked at the University of Michigan at Mott Children's Hospital, where I work today. And my dad, Bert, was a machinist who built parts for the space shuttle. And he's now 80 years old and sitting right over here. The 2 of them had the 3 of us. My brother Jim in the top left corner, myself, and my sister Sarah. And even though they raised us in that tiny town of 1,100 people, they told us every day that there was nothing that we couldn't do, or there was no dream too small without God by our side and hard work. And we believed them. This is the home they raised us in. And in that top left corner was my bedroom window. And I can remember Sunday afternoons after church, staring out that window into the sky, and I just knew that God had something big for me to do out there. I had no idea where, but I could feel it, and I couldn't wait to get there. And beyond church on Sundays and Wednesday nights for this program called Awana, our family was a huge sports family. Anything to do with the University of Michigan basketball, the University of Michigan football, the Detroit Lions, or the Detroit Pistons. If we weren't at the game, we were watching it on TV. And I loved my childhood. And although this picture is a picture of me my junior year of high school when I was 16, my journey as an athlete began in the 4th grade when I began playing several organized sports. But my dream and my love was basketball, and my goal was to become a college basketball player. And the summer that I turned 13 years old, my family became friends with my hero that I watched on TV, my very favorite player. And for the next 4 years, he would mentor me, he would teach me about the discipline and the mindset that it would take to become a college athlete. And I adored him. I actually made an 18-foot wall in my bedroom with all the magazine cutouts and the newspaper articles as he transitioned from the college to the pros. He was my hero, and I felt like the luckiest kid ever to have a relationship with a hero. I didn't know any other kid who had that opportunity. And speaking of being lucky, that summer before my senior year, my mom got me a job in the operating rooms at Mott Children's Hospital. I was an expert mopper. And I remember that very first week of work, watching this lady named Diane. And every day she was in a different surgery room, giving anesthesia to babies, to older kids. And I said to my mom, "What is nurse anesthetist?" And after she told me, and I kept watching Diane, I knew at 17 years old that that's what I wanted to do and be when I got of age. And my goal was to get a college basketball scholarship and to help pay for school on my journey to becoming a nurse anesthetist. So that August, I start back my senior year of high school. It's basketball season. August and September, I'm playing pretty good basketball, averaging 14 points and 10 rebounds a game. More letters from local colleges are coming in for basketball recruiting. And the boys at school thought I was pretty awesome, and so did I. I thought I had everything planned out. And then on September 27th, 1991, my hero came in town to see me on his only weekend off. And we decided to go to my friend Lori's house. Lori was like an older sister to me. She'd worked for my mom at the hospital for several years and was 4 years older than me, and she had her own apartment. So the three of us met at Lori's apartment, and my hero had bought a bottle of Studley's vodka, and we began playing this game called Quarters. And over the next 45 minutes, I think I had 6 or 7 shots. And as you can imagine, I became super drunk. And I just remember thinking that I needed to get to a bed. And I went and found the first bed that I could. And the last thing that I remember was projectile vomiting all over myself, in my hair, and along the right side of my body. And Lori was cleaning me up with a wash rag as my hero peered in from the doorway. And the next thing I remember is waking up to that man, my hero and my mentor, sexually assaulting me in every way imaginable, taking my virginity. And in that moment, my 17-year-old mind became twisted. And I thought that it was my fault, because if I wouldn't have been so drunk, he could have never raped me. And in that moment, I went from being the class clown at school and every day being the best day ever to feeling like my hero sucked the life out of me in that rape. I lost my basketball scholarships and I gave up on basketball. In my 17-year-old self, I didn't tell my parents because they didn't want them to sue him and he'd lose his $1 million contract. So my solution at 17 was to put on 30 pounds of weight as my protection so that no predator would want to hurt me again. And my only saving grace is that I'd already been admitted to a nursing school. In my freshman year of college, I became very self-destructive. I began drinking alcohol and smoking marijuana, trying to drown out all these words that you see on the left side of the screen. I was lost. I was broken. I felt like a victim. And as I was in nursing school that freshman year, my only glimpse of my authentic self is when I would be at the hospital taking care of patients. And I loved on them and I loved helping them. But it's like as soon as I left those hospital walls, my walls of protection would go up. And I became this tough girl who was hardened and had to protect herself because she didn't know who else was out there that was going to hurt her. And she kept smoking marijuana, trying to drown out all those words that she believed about herself when I looked in the mirror. And by God's grace, I graduated from the University of Michigan School of Nursing after 4 years. And as I started my career those next few years, I remember that with each patient interaction, it was like my authentic self and my soul was being reawakened. And one day I came home from work to get a voicemail, and my former hero was on that message saying that he'd been in therapy and he wanted to apologize to me. So I met him when he came in town to play one of our sports teams. And instead of a heartfelt apology, he told me that he knew he was going to rape me from the first day he saw me at 13 years old. And he waited for me to mature for all 4 of those years so he could do just that. And after that, I didn't know what I was going to do. I didn't know if I was going to let him flip my life upside down again, or I remembered that I'd never lost that dream to become a nurse anesthetist. And so I moved on and kept going forward, and I enrolled into nurse anesthetist school at Henry Ford Health System through the University of Detroit Mercy. And in 2003, I graduated with my Master of Science in Nurse Anesthesia. And I finally had the best jobs ever that I still have today. And along the journey of starting my career as a nurse anesthetist, I began my journey of healing. I went to therapy for 53 straight Wednesday nights, and I renewed my relationship with God. And along that journey, it took a long time, but I genuinely forgave my former hero for raping me. And I even began genuinely praying for his heart and his salvation. And as I did that, what I didn't realize was happening is that God was exchanging those words I believed about myself for the ones that you see on the right side. That I was a victor, not a victim. I felt peace for the first time since I was a little girl, and I was empowered. And what I didn't realize was the meaning of my name. That when my mama named me Elizabeth, it meant consecrated to God, called for a higher purpose. And I didn't realize that God was about to show me that purpose at 32 years old. And like this picture on the left, I learned that God often uses our deepest pains as the launching pad of our greatest callings. So my journey for his calling began with feeding the homeless in Ann Arbor and Detroit. And then at church, they announced this local orphan and foster care ministry with Wellspring Lutheran Services. And there was 250 children throughout Metro Detroit that my coworkers at U of M and Henry Ford and my family and friends, we would raise all the back-to-school supplies that you can see in the middle, and at Christmas get all of their Christmas presents. We did that for the last, now it's been 12 years, for over 4,000 children. And when I first started that ministry, I thought that's what God called me to do. But then 2 years into that, my coworker at Henry Ford asked me if I'd go on a mission trip to Kenya. I thought it would just be a one-time trip, but little did I know that God would intersect my life with Kenya Relief President Steve James, and Steve would become my mentor, and that on that first trip, God would place it on my heart to go home and start asking all my colleagues everywhere I could in every department I went to go to Kenya with me so we could help change the lives of the thousands of people I had just seen without access or affordability to health care. So now, 11 years later, I've led 21 medical surgical mission teams to Kenya. And thank you. Nearly 600 of my coworkers have gone to Kenya with me. I always laugh and say, you can't even get somebody to commit to meet you for lunch next week at home. But to think that by God's grace, 600 people have gone to Kenya with me. And together, we've performed more than 1,300 surgeries and treated an additional 7,200 patients medically. And I love it, and so do they. And somewhere along that route, Steve asked me if we were driving one day in Michigan, and he said, Elizabeth, you're the one. And I'm like, what one, Steve? And he said, God told me that when I retire someday, that you're supposed to take over as the president of Kenya Relief. And so I'm like, what? This little girl from Michigan? And so I've enrolled in a PhD program through Central Michigan University, obtaining my Global Health Administration degree. And God has given me more mentors in that program who have taken me to Geneva, to the United Nations and the World Health Organization, where I spent 5 days mentoring with the world's greatest scientists. I've been to the Centers for Disease Control in Atlanta, and I am going to the World Congress in Rome. And I say all of that, not to brag, but to show you that that little girl who was looking out the window of her bedroom window had no idea that God was going to bring her to this stage in this format and call me to this. but he's utilizing all my gifts he'd already given me, and I love it. And he can do the same for you. And so what can you do to find your calling? You've got to pray, and you ask God to show you your purpose and trust him with whatever he reveals to you. Have faith that whatever God calls you to do, he's going to protect you through it, and he's going to give you all the resources to carry out that mission. And all the gifts that you already have, he's going to utilize them all. This plan was already preordained and built for you. And what you don't have, he's going to grow you in more ways so that you can carry out your calling and live out your purpose. For we are all God's handiwork, created in Christ Jesus to do good works, which God prepared in advance for us to do. And the last thing I want to do today is share with you my mama's doll. This is Elizabeth. She's now 69 years old. She's been beat up. But when I left M3 in 2016, after speaking that first year, that fall, on October 4th, I was getting an award from Wellspring Lutheran Services. And in front of 400 people, I'm finishing the talk, and my mama's standing up at a table in front of everybody, said, "For God's honor and glory." And I laughed, and my mom's pretty boisterous, and I said, "Yes, Mama, for God's honor and glory." And that next morning, she left me a voicemail at work like she did every Monday through Friday. And what she said after giving me those Bible verses was, "Elizabeth, you are not my child. You are God's child, and I couldn't be more proud of you." And what I didn't know is that my mama was going to die in her sleep that night. And she's right. I am God's child, and I am living out my calling, and I love it. And it is my prayer for each and every one of you as you leave from this conference today that you step forth into the plan that God called out for you to do, and you're going to love it just like I do. Thank you.